All right, everyone, we are going to move in to our keynote speaker, and I am thrilled. I am just honored to have Dr. Imani Woody here. Dr. Woody is an internationally and nationally recognized thought leader and an advocate of women, people of color, of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, same gender loving LGBTQ plus people for more than 25 years. She has addressed the issues elder LGBTQ plus individuals and the specific jeopardies that LGBTQ plus elders of color face as they age. Dr. Woody has a PhD in human services, specializing in nonprofit management. Her thesis was Lift Every Voice, a qualitative exploration of ageism and heterosexism as experienced by older African American lesbian women and gay males when addressing social services needs. Dr. Woody has served on the board of directors of the Montner Project for Lesbians, Women in the Life Association, the Whitman Walker Lesbian Services, and is the former chair of SAGE Metro DC. She was the first program officer for the 50 Plus Ministry of Metropolitan Community Churches and currently serves on the board of the LGBTQ Plus Technology Institute. She has been appointed by former DC Mayor Vincent Gray and DC Mayor Muriel Bowser to the Office of LGBTQ Plus Affairs. Dr. Woody has also been appointed commissioner by Mayor Bowser to serve on the Global Age-Friendly Task Force. As a veteran community organizer, Dr. Woody retired from AARP to become a pioneer in the building of alternative housing and creating welcoming environments. She is the founder and CEO of Mary's House for Older Adults, with the vision and commitment to serve LGBTQ plus and same gender loving elders experiencing housing insecurity and isolation. Dr. Woody has secured funding required to begin construction of a 15-room communal residence in West DC, the only one in the country, as well as designing the villages at Mary's House, creating a virtual community village. Dr. Woody brought these perspectives and decades of community praxis to the first White House Summit on LGBTQ plus elder housing development as a panelist in its national LGBT elder housing symposiums. In 2021, Dr. Woody was invited to the White House by Vice President Harris to join a small, intimate group to discuss issues that impact LGBTQ and same-gender loving elders. Most recently, she was invited by the Biden administration to meet with its highest ranking lesbians to discuss matters impacting lesbians and women loving women, and presented on LGBTQ plus and same gender loving elder issues for HUD staffers. Dr. Woody is the principal of IWF Consulting, LLC, providing board, staff, and volunteer development using a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens. She has been a life coach for more than 10 years, delivering Living Life Like It's Golden. Love that. A program that empowers people, particularly people of color, and women to their lives more fully through visioning. A winner of many honors and awards, Dr. Woody was a 2019 Next Avenue Influencers in Aging, a 2020 Encore Fellow, and a winner of the 2023 AARP Purpose Award. Dr. Woody currently lives in Washington, D.C. with her wife of more than 20 years, Miss Andrea Macco, and her son, daughter-in-law, and grandchildren. Dr. Woody is also the program officer for the 50 Plus Ministry of Metro. Oh, and I'm repeating, my goodness, I'm so sorry. Dr. Woody, welcome to the stage. I'm so honored to have you. It's so good to see you. How you feeling?
I'm great. I'm great. I'm just listening to you read that theses. Thank you. Thank
But
you.
you know what? We needed to know every detail because your work is powerful and it's an honor to have you. So you know what? I'm glad I was able to read this thesis, as you say.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me. How cool is that? I appreciate being here. I appreciate being here. I follow Open House. I've been following it since almost its inception. And I'm so glad it's still standing and vibing and thriving. So thank you for that. Um, I wanted to talk a little bit wanted to talk a little bit about like winter is coming, and for many of us, it means gloves and hats and scarves. For others of us, we still get the sunshine. As I prepared for this talk, I was bundled up in a turtleneck and a cable knit sweater, and I was thinking winter is closer than I think, 30 degrees, and perhaps I should turn on the heat. My mind automatically drifted to thinking about the older adults and elders that are in need of warm, safe, decent, affordable, and welcoming housing like Openhouse and like Mary's House for older adults. Also think about the increase of homelessness and the decrease of affordable housing among elders, LGBTQ plus SGL, same gender loving folks in particular, in my city, in California, and around the country. Often the focus is on families and children, and rarely on elders and older people who are without housing. Heck, as with many issues, older people are invisible. It's certainly the case when we speak of the lack of affordable housing. Traditionally, there are two major paths to homelessness for people over 60. In the first, the person is classified as a product of chronic homelessness. That, excuse me, that is, they've been homeless before they were old and are in a seemingly unbreakable cycle of housing instability. The second pathway is a much newer phenomenon and is increasing at an alarming rate. Older adults and elders who heretofore have lived independently in their own private living spaces are experiencing for the first time a lack of housing. Research is identifying the following trends present and overlapping, contributing to lack of housing of older adults and elders. Living on a fixed income, using more than 30% of that fixed income to pay for housing. Financial problems, including job loss, discontinued public assistance. Disagreement with persons with whom they were staying, a relationship breakdown. Physical or mental health problems, and the lack of access to affordable senior housing. All these things on their face may not seem to be a lot, but they had been brought to light during the pandemic. The rate of folks losing their jobs and being over 50 years old, being over 50 years old and losing one's job was the highest percentage of the demographic that lost their job. And we know when we talk about Black and brown people and LGBTQ plus people in particular, those numbers go up. The calls and the emails that I receive every month from people looking to live at Mary's House confirm that there are many, many elders on the second path. Like the phone call I received from Frank, not his real name, an older gay man who was completing the online letter of interest. Dr. Woody, he began, I know Mary's House is not opened yet, but I want to put my letter of interest in because I need housing now. I am a white gay man and I am unable to afford my rent and the rising rent increases in the city. I have to find some other place to live. Do you have any idea of where I can go? We speak a little longer. I collect some information and promise to get back with him. Frank was really asking, are there places that will accept the whole of me? The gay male part of me, the old of me, the economics of me, a place that will accept my friends. And then there's Jane, not her real name, an older lesbian who had lived with a friend and her friend's dad for many years. Actually, the friend was her partner, but they were closeted. She shared in the care of the friend's dad for a long time, even after her friend died. However, at some point, the siblings wanted Jane to move out. She had no place to go. Her homophobic brother promised her violence if she brought any of that homosexual-ish up in here. Jane is a strong supporter of Mary's house, stating, "I can't wait for it to be built." Well, us either. With your continued help and support, and with a little luck, we will put the shovel in the ground in November and build the first brick and mortar Mary's house in 2023. And yes, there's some additional brick and mortar residences in various stages of completion across the U.S. that are LGBTQ plus SGL affirming, including Openhouse. However, it is unlikely that we'll be able to build ourselves out of this situation, right? It's not likely we will be able to build enough LGBTQ plus SGL affirming, affordable, welcoming brick and mortar residences to stem the tide of increased homelessness for older adults. So what can we do in the interim? One of the first things we can do is to acknowledge is that that lack of housing is a detriment of health and therefore a public health issue. We are all familiar with the elder who has to make choices around medicine, food, or rent. That is not it. Those are not situations of the past, folks. Those are situations now that our elders are facing every day. Like Rose, who is one of the many elders who lost their jobs during the pandemic, or Jose, neither their real names, who is facing housing uncertainty because of the death of his husband and the loss of his husband's income. He's wondering, how is he going to pay his condo fee? Or elders like Frank, who are forced to use more and more of their resources to obtain shelter because the variable of accessibility has decreased and the variable of affordability, because the available of accessibility has decreased and the variable of affordability has decreased in the equation to stem the tide of no housing for elders. As a public health issue, we can recognize that without stable housing, older adults and elders, like families and children, are prone to a myriad of health issues and their quality of life can suffer. Research has shown that housing affordability shapes the neighborhood conditions and the ability of the person to make healthy choices. Strategies must focus on the safety and quality of housing for everyone. They should include an awareness and acceptance of the culture of the individual, as well as the neighborhood, the culture of the individual, whether that person is a BIPOC person, that person is old, young, fat, skinny, poor, rich, first generation immigrant, here since enslavement in 1600s. They should include an awareness and acceptance of the culture of the individual as well as the neighborhood. By considering housing a public health issue, we can stimulate greater advocacy and address broader and more complex problems. Participation should be collaborative from the individual, the community, the agency, local and federal governments, and others working together to end current and potential disparities and create safety nets for those most vulnerable. So we know housing is important. I wanted to kind of digress a little bit and talk about social isolation and loneliness, which for me in my work comes to be one of the top things that happen to older adults. And many of us have felt this during the pandemic. It was easy to feel lonely and alone in the pandemic when we were in our little bubble. And for elders and older adults who often lived by themselves or lived in an assisted facility, that loneliness, their loneliness increased, and their isolation increased. For many older adults living alone, or the death of family, friends, or suffering with chronic ailments makes social isolation an ongoing burden. A 2020 study by the National Academies found that social isolation significantly increases a person's risk of premature death. Being alone is deadlier for people than if they were smokers, smoking 15 cigarettes a day. When I heard that, that was shocking. Or if they were smokers, if they were obese, or if they were physically inactive. So being alone is deadly. Those things, being alone is deadlier than those things. So in addition to creating welcoming housing, we've got to look at the whole picture. We have to look at the picture of us aging and the intersections of that. I was sharing with Ephraim that I went through the airport the other day coming back from Baja, and in Texas, I have wheelchair assistance, and in Texas they have a line for people in wheelchairs and then a line for able-bodied people. So most of the people in the line were older, were women, and were Black and brown people. The people who were allowing folks to go through this process were TSA agents, and they were white, male in this instance. And so being in that situation and seeing the TSA agents allowing able-bodied folks to allowing that queue to be emptied before accepting two people in a wheelchair, I was incensed. I felt like a second-class citizen because I didn't show up as an able-bodied person. And we were all older in that set. So it just put my mind at the intersectionality of being able-bodied and having a disability instead of being able-bodied. And I started looking at that and I look at it often, but you really look at it when you are part of that group. And so I talked to the TSA agents after I got my passport back. I talked to the TSA agents and said, "Why is this?" And they said that it's the law. I said, "It can't be the law. I'm in airports often. It can't be the law. Maybe it's a reg." And I said, it's an awful reg. I said, "Can you see what I see?" I said, "I see Black and brown people, mostly women, lined up like cattle. And I see you allowing able-bodied people to move freely around." I said, "Do you understand this picture? Do you get it?" And they hadn't thought about it. So now I don't know if anything's going to change, but I spoke up and the seed has been planted. So there's that. So in addition to creating welcoming housing, we must create and sustain welcoming environments where we are connected. At Mary's House for Older Adults, we have created the Villages at Mary's House, which expands on the village concept to introduce systems that allows one to physically age in place. The Villages at Mary's House create virtual communities and families with a telephone call at the same time and day of the week that checks in on the elder. A key component is that the caller is no more than 6 degrees of knowing the person, so that a friendship, a relationship can be built. An environment is being created wherein the elder feels cared for. The elder feels free to share. "I need help to pick up my prescription. I need help to go buy groceries. I need money. I need assistance." So we acknowledge anniversaries. That does not only include wedding anniversaries, but it includes death anniversaries. We acknowledge birthdays, and we send "just thinking about you" cards. We provide a coordination of services during crisis and just living. This, along with providing affordable and welcoming housing, will go a long way to creating the world in which I want to live. I invite you to join me. Join Openhouse, join Sage, and the many others that were on this call, in this conference, on this journey to make this world a better place, a world where we all are welcomed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Woody. That absolutely incredible to have you here. And that anecdote, I know we had shared that. I think we were just talking yesterday.
Yesterday, yes.
Yeah, it was just so incredible. I'm just curious. Do you want to talk a little bit about Mary's house?
Sure, sure. You want to ask questions, or you want? I can talk forever.
Yeah, please tell me more.
All right. So, Mary's house started in 2010, or it was my dad died in 2010. He left me the house I grew up in, and so I decided with my kitchen cabinet. We decided, well, what should we do with this house? And part of it was based on how my dad, an old black guy with middle class, with some means, good insurance, and a good place. He went into this facility, which was one of the good facilities in continent, and we pulled him out, and he was incontinent. And so he died at home. And then later on, probably a month or so later, I learned a colleague had died. And he died in one of the upscale residences in suburban DC. And they found him 5 days later. He had died 5 days later. And so that meant to me that perhaps he had stopped playing canasta, stopped going to the movies. His friends apparently had stopped calling him. I know during the pandemic, if I didn't reach out or if I didn't respond, people would say, "Oh, Imani's not going anywhere. She's too busy with Mary's house. Or she's not." And your people stopped calling. So folks stopped calling him, and he was found 5 days later. And we're finding that this continues to happen in large buildings, apartment buildings. And so one of the things that we could have done was to build an apartment building out of the property that Mary's house sits on, but we decided to build communal units. So we're building 15 communal units to house LGBTQ SGL folks over 60 with affordable housing. And so from 30% to 50% AMI, the average median income, will be the people who get to live in our live in Mary's house for older adults. So that should happen. As I said earlier, we should go to closing in November, and the shovel should go in the ground the end of November, and we should complete it in 6 to 8 months. I understand, but we found that wasn't enough during the pandemic. That wasn't enough. We were having people who, I don't know if you remember. But folks were saying that that old people should take one for the Gipper. Old people were being, I see you shaking your head. You remember, right? Yeah. That, old people were considered throwaway people. And so older people were scared to come outside, scared to do a lot of things. And so we found that in our communities, LGBTQ SGL communities in particular, we needed to help. So we stepped up and started the villages at Mary's house, where we make these phone calls, where we actually did drive-bys, which were the most fun things. The pandemic made, we saw the first birthday drive-by, and people were doing birth. We said, wow, why do we do that? So we just would call the elder and say, what are you doing at 4:00, knowing they're not doing a whole lot? Well, we're going to come by, and we have a caravan, 3-4 cars, and people, yay, how you doing? They come outside. And we still do that. It's not a big caravan, but we still do a drive-by because a lot of the elders are still concerned about COVID and its offspring. And so we still do that, and we send PPI, send cards and all kinds of things to make sure that people are touched. People are connected. People are not isolated, because isolation can kill you, as I talked. Yes.
Absolutely. Isolation, absolutely. The pervasiveness of it can absolutely, literally shorten people's lives.
Yes.
And I have, this work is going to be incredible. I know whose door I'm knocking on in 30 years. So you better save a spot for me. But there's a participant, an audience member that has a question, and they asked, how can we ensure that we create safe space beyond the walls of Mary's House, Openhouse, and Sage? And it's a difficult question. I'm not sure that there's, a plug-in answer that will cover the complexity of this question, but just curious if you have any insight.
Well, I think we're trying to, I think that's a great question. Absolutely wonderful, because I said earlier, we can't build ourselves out of this. We cannot build enough brick and mortar spaces. We cannot do enough culturally competent or cultural humility training out of this. So we have to meet people where they are. And for us, that is creating the villages at Mary's House, where we are creating safe space virtually, right? We're creating that telephone call. We're creating webinars. We're teaching people how to use the computer and join us for a movie night, or join us for a conversation, or learn more about Mary's House. So we're connecting the dots there. We've got we have a day at the Smithsonian where we the Smithsonian checks in with us and finds different avenues of showing where gay people were in this particular museum. So, we're trying to get creative where we can create safe spaces. And we also collaborate with organizations in our city that serve elders, so they can become culturally competent if they're not in the spaces that they have, in the spaces that currently exist.
Mm. Yeah, that's really powerful. And I know, across all three organizations that were named, yes, the brick and mortar, we try to create these, what's the word? Like self-sustaining communities, really with the goal of aging in place. And there's many complex programs intersecting, hoping to allow for that housing retention. But another piece that both Sage and Open House do is try to metastasize our culture and our understanding out into the existing infrastructure, because ultimately not everyone is going to be able to age in place. There are just particular, whether it's a combination of clinical diagnoses, maybe dementia, maybe significant fall risk where this person cannot live at home. And so we inevitably have to go into the, long-term care facilities, social services, really anyone intersecting with aging, our aging community, and go in, provide trainings, et cetera, yes, but a deeper look at the culture that's fostered in those facilities and aging services to hope and beg for them to kind of see the humanity in our community and in our elders. And that tends to be kind of that separate approach outside of course, building our organizations up and building the brick and mortar that we have to offer for our community. But that extra step, it's long, arduous work. And I don't know that it will ever end in many ways. I think we're always striving for that utopia, but it's difficult. It's and unlike many other countries, around the world, we are extremely diverse outside. There's something to be said about some of the countries that might have a more homogeneous population, whereas we have very significant, as we've already discussed in this program, going from rural to urban settings, it is literally, you're transforming into a different dimension in many ways, depending on what region of this country you live in. So every approach has to be so culturally tailored to the population that's aiming to build community for themselves.
Yeah. And there's one thing that I want to mention, and you have someone on stage right there, Ephraim, I think they can give us the website, but I'm part of the project with Sage and HRC that are doing a long-term equity index. It's LEI, I may have the acronym wrong, but it's the LEI index that organizations, assisted living and retirement organizations that house people, can rate themselves on how well they're doing with LGBTQ clients. I remember doing my thesis back in the day, and I was looking for LGBTQ folks in nursing homes and in assisted living facilities, and the administrators inevitably said to me, "There aren't any. We don't have any gay people here." And I would say, you know what? And I would see the big dyke in the corner. I'm not outing her, but I see her, and they say they don't have anyone. And I said, you know what? This show, if you don't know any, this really means that your organization is not culturally competent, and you
Mm,
need this work. So, and inevitably, I went DMV district, the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia, though, using those three states to get participants, and that was amazing to hear that across the board.
yeah.
Uh, but there's progress that has been made, at least in those areas. Although there's more progress that needs to be made. Like there was a councilwoman who said, "Why do gay people need something different?" I couldn't imagine. Here's a councilwoman representing a part of the city, and she says, "How could what?" But she has grown. She has evolved, just like my favorite president evolved, and we have marriage equality, right? So
Right, right.
with education, and we just keep I, and all these other folks. We just keep moving forward, moving forward.
Yeah, that's really amazing. Yeah, absolutely. Everything that you're saying speaks to my soul. I think that particular comment that always happens where we don't have, they don't exist here, and it yet again speaks to how we make individuals invisible.
Yeah,
And when you mentioned that this councilwoman didn't even understand, this is the constant and common thread where people that are legislating have no direct experience. This is why reproductive rights are in the place that they are. It's just this
yes,
constant role of government not necessarily directly representing the individuals that are affected by the laws that they pass. And even when you mentioned this comment that this person made that there weren't any LGBTQ people there, I'm a nurse. I worked as a CNA for 5 years, and then I've been a nurse now for 8 years. And I was just working the floor. I had gotten some pronoun, kind of like a similar to when you have like the RN statement right there, and then underneath that I just had my pronouns, and it just said he him, and I was just passing around going through my treatments, and I bent over this, it was at a skilled nursing facility, and I was providing some treatment for this patient, and my name tag must have just been right in her face as I was providing some wound care, and she starts bawling. She just started weeping. And she came out to me in that moment that she was trans, and she's been living in that nursing facility for almost 11 years. She had a pretty bad stroke at a very young age. And this was her life, that she was just going to be kind of, damned to having to live in this facility, and had never come out to a single staff member. And it was just like, this is exactly the problem. And this was in Oakland, California. This is,
yes. Mhm.
for all intents and purposes, this is a pretty, like, we're up to par. We know the language, we know the
Mhm.
culture, but even still here, we have so much to gain as far as how we are not representing our individual selves when we work for these institutions. We are representing the healthcare system. We are representing the housing administration. We are whatever organization, whatever industry that we represent. We are that system in that moment. We are the cells of that system.
That's right.
Executing work.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah, definitely. There's a question here, also from
Mhm.
another audience member. A lot of the previous speakers have spoken on the experiences of rural LGBTQ plus elders and the silencing and invisibility of those communities. Can you envision a future of coalition building across urban and rural elder housing organizations to better serve aging LGBTQ populations in both spaces in the US? And what would that look like?
Wow. Now that's a question with many parts.
And that's the question is right there for you if you need to review.
Right. That's a question of many parts. And I'm going to say, yes, I can envision it. Yes, I can envision rural and urban workabouts. I can envision that. I am on the board of a organization that is rural in its concept, LGBTQ tech. They're in West Virginia. They do a lot of work in entrepreneurship, etc. And but much of what they do is in rural West Virginia. And so I was there. I did a speaking engagement for them, and the way the founders have just worked together on a local rule, a state, and a national level with those organizations is just phenomenal. So it can happen. We all know, I think we all know about going across the aisle, as the politicians say. We can do that. We can most definitely do that and make change happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, another piece that we're probably missing is that so many, and we talked about this yesterday, many of our elders leave rural communities for what they, you know, what appears to be more accepting
For the
urban
goal
settings.
in the streets, for the
Right, but leveraging those connections to those to their original those rural communities, because naturally there's going to be LGBTQ older adults where they from the communities that they left. And so kind of leveraging the relationships that our elders have with their homes,
right.
and maybe potentially trying to kind of coalition build in that way.
Yes.
And I think it's going to require some cultural competency from both sides. To be honest, there's such a stark difference between living in an urban setting and living in the rural community, and so there's going to be a lot of cultural competency that's going to be required, a learning curve from both
Sure.
parties. You know, that's
Right.
not just it's definitely not just rural communities. It's also us that we would have to learn. How to be humble and how to enter into spaces that might be culturally, especially regionally, different than our own.
Right. And except where you are a guest. When you go into a situation and you are a guest. So I was in Mexico. I was a guest in that country. I was, and as we were landing, the pilot said, "Wear your masks." Mexico is asking folks to wear their mask, and the ugly Americans were just couldn't have enough to say. What?
Mhm.
Wear their masks? What are they? Why do we have to wear masks? We don't wear a mask in Cincinnati or wherever the hell. And it was just amazing. Where you are a guest, the guests are asking that you wear masks. Situation in their country. So I'm just saying, when you be a guest, you meet people where they are. You don't bring your I know it all, because you only know what you know. And if by going across the aisle, you can know what you don't know, you can learn something.
Absolutely.
So I would just suggest one goes in with an open mind when one is thinking that you're bringing something to the table that everybody needs. Hopefully, you've done a needs assessment, and they do really need that, as opposed to you thinking they need that. But that's a conversation for another time.
Right. There's nothing more harmful than making those assumptions about what a community needs, which was pretty
Yes.
standard practice for a long time. This kind of like cultural competence centering the community, idea, as sad as it is, it's fairly new in the grand scheme of the way social services
Yes.
and aging and housing services have been. You know, I have a selfish question, because I just have to know what that invitation was like by the vice president. So do you want to talk about what that experience was like?
I'll put a pin in that. I want to say this one last
Oh,
thing,
please.
is that for a long time. So I've been, such a work was called African American Studies, right? So I've been here a long time, and we used to say, play by the golden rule. Treat everyone like you would want to be treated. That was a good rule. But now I say, go by the platinum rule. The platinum rule is treat everyone as they want to be treated.
Ooh.
Wow, right? Treat people like they want to be treated, not like you would want to be treated, because that might be a little off center for me.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense actually, which it actually naturally adopts that equity concept, right? Because it's
Yes,
not always going to look the same how I want to be treated or how people should be treated. And
correct.
so adapting it from an equity lens,
Yeah.
that's a really powerful. I'm going to start using the platinum rule then. How about
Yes,
that?
please.
I, don't-
Yes.
I will definitely credit you. Definitely.
And I don't know. I didn't make it up. Someone, I saw it. In our work, I saw it.
Okay,
So I'm not the creator. I'm just pushing it along.
the vessel.
Yes, the
Vessel.
vessel. The vessel. So, getting a note from the vice president's office, the vice president would welcome the honor of your presence, or some, the real sparkly language. That was exciting. Or when and also meeting Vice President Kamala Harris was exciting. Like I always when I see her, I think I know she's not really tall or really big, but she has a big presence when she was on the television. She's a really itty bitty thing, a small woman, but she was just very down to earth. We were in her what they call the vice president's conference room or something like that, and she said, "Well, we've been making changes. I've been making a little bit of change because when you go in the room, there are all the other vice presidents, and she's the first vice president of color, and first woman. So the pictures are pretty stark to the company that was in there, which was people of color mostly, and all lesbians in the first visit that I did at the White House with her. And so she had gotten a bust of Frederick Douglass was in the conference room. And she had done some other things that made it more the people's VP house as opposed to just white old people, men in there. So that was amazing. She listened. She had folks take notes, and I'm part of a group that is continuing to work on some issues.
Wow, and obviously well deserved from the theses that I read at the beginning of before you spoke, because it's just such an honor to be able to share space with you and hear from you, and I really hope we get to continue our connection and just foster that. So thank you so much for being here, Dr. Woody.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Take care.